It's Saturday, October 4th, and we're seeing a return of severe weather, specifically being in the northern and upper plains of the United States. We do have only a marginal today, so not really anything super extreme, but still want to be on the lookout for that severe weather threat. It's mostly going to be for some damaging winds and gusts in excess of 60 miles an hour. And then that hail threat is going to be a little bit more confined to a skinnier sliver, kind of stretching from the northeastern Colorado corner all the way up to the North Dakota, Minnesota, and Canada border. Now, there isn't really a tornado threat outlined by the Storm Prediction Center at the current moment, but there are a couple of areas which I do think definitely don't have a non zero chance of producing. And it looks like our first storms could actually start pretty early today. They're actually going to kind of be from yesterday's system a tad bit more, all the way over in the far eastern corner of northern Utah and Idaho. We could see a couple of cells potentially bringing that threat for some damaging winds, maybe some small hail, but that tornado threat is likely going to be essentially zero with those. And then we're going to see that threat for some storms in our main area that's highlighted today, which stretches all the way from Colorado up all the way to the US Canada border. We're going to see some storms touch off along that trough area of forcing. Then even there might be a bit of a front. I think the front's going to be a bit further out from these storms, so that could potentially limit the instability available to these, also limiting the ability to produce some of these severe factors. So these storms likely won't really be severe, but definitely be on the lookout for a couple of strong thunderstorms if you're in western Colorado at around the pretty early morning hours, actually. And then kind of this storm complex is going to start to push a little bit north and eastward. We're going to see a couple of short waves in our trough push through at this time as well. With these short waves, we'll also see some greater organizational shear. And then also this line will be available to areas in front of our front. So definitely more instability available to these as well, but they'll also likely be a little less surface based. So that's one of the reasons why that tornado threat is almost zero, but definitely more of a damaging wind and hail threat. With these, all of that hail threat's going to remain pretty low because it looks like it's going to be a pretty linear and kind of clustery mode today. And then, yeah, this is really going to last all the way up until just after nightfall. We're really anywhere along this line stretching from eastern Colorado all the way up to Nebraska. We could potentially see some severe storms kind of embedded in this big squall. And taking a peek up in the northerner parts of our risk area, of course, we're going to see some storms touch off in that Nebraska and South Dakota area. But it looks like when the low level jet kicks in, kind of coupled with a short wave pushing through up here, and then that front also kind of being in front of our main clusters of storms, we could also potentially see a tornado risk in the short term, really stretching from South Dakota all the way up to the North Dakota and Minnesota section of our risk. I actually do think there is a possibility of seeing a weak spin up tornado during this time. I don't really think we'll see anything strong because all these storms are looking like a pretty linear mode. So just a couple of spin ups within a line. But also at this time, we could also see that threat for some damaging winds increase, maybe some 60 to 70 mile an hour gust, and then some small hail. But after this period, it looks like it's just going to turn into a rain threat. Not really going to see a super big flooding threat out here, but still might want to be aware for some flash flood warnings as well during this time. Now, one thing I will say about this cluster of storms that kind of gets touched off pretty rapidly up here in North Dakota and Minnesota is on a bit of a stationary front, and also it's kind of being initiated with the help of the low level jet and of course that big trough. The HRRR does like to overcook these sometimes, but I still wouldn't be surprised to see a big cluster up here near the US Canada border of a lot of embedded supercells within a line. And here's that big trough that's kind of responsible for everything. Of course, we have that center of low pressure within here. And then we also have a couple of embedded short waves or low pressure systems along our trough. Also, this is kind of one of the reasons why we're seeing that big front, which kind of drapes all the way across the US, really. This is going to be the main causer of our severe weather today. And then, of course, we have a couple of weather soundings. This is from the more south portions of our risk area today. We're definitely going to see some more higher base storms with mostly just that damaging wind threat, kind of going to be fueled by that 30 knot organizational shear, not super close to that 40 knot kind of optimal range that we like to see with organizational shear, but still pretty far up there. So definitely these storms could have the potential to produce some damaging characteristics like hail and wind, but that's going to be pretty much it for the more southern portions of our risk area. But moving north, that definitely changes a little. Shear is going to be better on all fronts. So that's bulk and then low level shear. Our low level shear is going to be nearing 30 knots, and our low level helicity is almost 200. So I definitely think there's a pretty solid chance of seeing a couple of spin up tornadoes within this. We also are going to see that cloud base be lowered a bit because the storm clusters are going to be behind the front up here at this portion. Now, there is going to be some capping going on and some stability at the surface level. To see a couple of tornadoes, they would have to overcome that. But because the shear parameters are pretty solid, I definitely wouldn't rule out maybe seeing a spin up. Other things to note are that our cape is going to be a bit more solid up here, as well as our downdraft cape and precipitable water. So I definitely think that threat for some small hail, maybe 1 to 1.5 inch in diameter, then some 60 to 70 mile an hour damaging gusts are also going to be in play as well. And our severe weather threat is definitely not all that's going on right now. We do have another uptick in the probability of seeing this kind of form out here in the tropics in the main development region. It's now up to a 50% chance of formation in this little blob off the coast of Florida, just kind of from a remnant stationary boundary. Maybe something will spin up there. It looks like nothing is going to be spun up there. Just definitely a couple more days of a lot of showery and windy weather in Florida. But now we're going to talk about the potential track and strength of this guy down here in the main development region. It's starting with what it looks like on satellite. This is the tropical wave coming off the coast of Africa, and it definitely looks pretty solid right now. Definitely a lot of thunderstorms kind of consolidating. That's something that you would see before a tropical system forms. And then across our weather models, this is the GFS, so not really as reliable with kind of spinning up storms, but there is agreement that we could potentially see something spin up by the end of this week. And then there's also a solid potential that that trend of storms developing out in the main development region and kind of getting punched away by the high pressure systems and then fronts coming off the coast looks like it could prevail here once again. That's what's going to be shown in the model. It's just going to be sucked out to sea once again, not affecting the United States at all. But another thing I do want to point out, which I did touch on last video, was that the Caribbean gyre could potentially come alive. During this time of year, later in hurricane season, sometimes we see storms kind of get shot out of this area in the Caribbean, and it looks like we could potentially see that again. There is some model agreement of maybe a system forming around October 15th or 16th, but that's still really far out, so not confirming anything, just a hint that the Caribbean gyre could be coming alive, and this might be a region that we might want to start watching more closely until the end of hurricane season.